You're listening to the ADHD Support Talk Radio podcast. ADHD Support Talk is brought to you by addclasses.com. Visit www.addclasses.com and sign up for free webinars and online events today. Hello, welcome back to ADHD Support Talk Radio. I'm your co-host, Lynne Edris, and I am a productivity and ADHD coach. So I help overwhelmed professionals reduce procrastination, improve time management, and get more done with less effort so that they have more time, more energy, and more bandwidth for the things that matter most to them. You guys know I am a woman with ADHD myself, so I have been there. I have been where so many of you guys are, and I have come out the other side, so to speak. So I've gone from living in that constant state of chaos and overwhelm and underperformance that we all know far too well when we are adults with ADHD to live a life of more success and fulfillment than I once dreamed was possible. And I really do believe that every single one of you can share the same success yourselves. You can learn more about me and what I do at www.coachingadvantages.com. And when you text the keyword hack, HACK, to the number 33777, I'll send you my 7 foolproof productivity hacks to help you add hours of free time to your weeks by investing just a few smart minutes each day. Well, today I have with us the founder of the podcast, Tara McGillicuddy, and we are going to talk in a moment about ADHD lies we tell ourselves. So welcome, Tara.
Hi, I'm glad to be back again. As Lynn said, my name's Tara McGillicuddy, and I am the founder of the podcast. I'm also a woman with ADHD myself. And what I do is I help people shift their energy to live happier, more productive lives. You can learn more about me and the services that I offer by going to taramcgillicuddy.com.
Awesome. So we were talking before the recording started about the ADHD lies we tell ourselves. Fibs, whatever you want to call them, untruths, the fibs we tell ourselves, why we do it, and how to stop. Some of the things that I hear from my clients, some of the things, the lies I've told myself over time that really don't, they really don't help us move forward. They really tend to get in our way. They stop us from living the lives that we're capable of. One of the first ones I thought of, and it kind of made me chuckle, is it'll be easier tomorrow or it'll be easier later. So whenever you're facing something that feels hard or it feels like you're having a hard time getting started on it, there's that, I've felt this so many times, that flash, that glimpse of I'll do this later because it'll be easier kind of a feeling. Does that one resonate with you, Tara?
Yeah, it does. And I don't even know if it's a lie. I think when we are in that moment, we believe it'll be easier later.
It is.
I'd say 99.9% of the times it's not. It's usually harder because we've waited longer and it's piled up bigger, or most of the time it's not easier later. And I think it's not easy now. So it's like, okay, I don't even know whether we think about it or if it's conscious, but yeah, it's not a truth for most of us.
No, it's not a truth. And actually it tends to be something that does make things worse over time. So you're right. It doesn't get easier. Sometimes this kind of brings to another one, but sometimes as we get a little closer to the deadline and we get a little bit of that pressure and that stress buildup, that adrenaline, that pressure, that, sort of additional stimulation can make it feel easier because it can get us fired up, get us, engaged. The little bit of that pressure gets the adrenaline flowing. But in the grand scheme of things, that's not a very healthy pattern either, which we'll talk about in a minute. But that whole, it'll be easier later or it'll be easier tomorrow is definitely one that I have to actually really push back against. That's a big one for a lot of us.
Yeah. Let's get through a little bit now. I think we just have to begin to rationalize and think through it. And it's more than likely not going to be easier later.
No.
Not now.
odds are not good. History definitely tells you otherwise. One of the other ones that kind of ties into that is I work best under pressure. And that is something that is, it's the thing that, I also talk about the motivation myth, but that I work best under pressure is for a lot of us, like we can't muster the motivation, we can't muster the engagement until we get that pressure, until we get that stress, until we get that rush of adrenaline and other neurotransmitters that comes with a deadline. So then things feel easier.
Mhm.
But we all know that's not a sustainable pattern. We all know that most of the time, if we'd given ourselves more time to work on the thing and we hadn't done it under such great pressure, that it probably would have been a better end product anyway. And it's just not something that's very healthy, and it's not something that's very sustainable. Can you relate to that one?
Yeah, and I think there's some, it gets done out of pressure. It gets out of the
Yes.
way under pressure.
Yep.
It gets done at 80% instead of 111% with the perfectionistic. So there's some truth to it, but I don't work best under a ton of pressure. Sometimes
Right.
and I know a lot of people listening, the brain can shut down depending on how much pressure it is, and it doesn't get done at all, or it doesn't get done well a lot of the times.
Yeah.
So
And it
yeah,
gets done at a
yeah,
huge cost, right?
yes, yes.
I'm not sure how to say this, but I always feel like there's with us, with like a little bit of pressure, the right amount of pressure and the right
Yeah.
kind of pressure sometimes can be a good thing. But there's
Mhm.
this tipping point
Yes.
where we go from kind of propelled or kind of pushed by the pressure to shut down by it. And it's
Yeah.
almost like it's not always easy to know where that tipping point is. It kind of moves.
It
It's not
does.
exactly in the same place. And I think too, as you get older, that whole I work under pressure thing worked when I was young,
Mhm.
because, well, I had probably more energy. I had a lot less responsibility. My responsibilities were much less complex. So if I call them like crash and burn cycle. If I did one of those crash and burn cycles where I delay, avoid, mad panicked rush at the end, get the thing done. And then usually there's an amount of time that we have to recover from that. When you're young, like there's not as much stuff piling up during that recovery period.
Yeah.
As you get older, life gets more complex. You've got more stuff that
Yeah.
needs to be taken care of, that requires more, bandwidth, more energy. And that stuff gets put off while you're recovering from the last rush of craziness. You really do start to accumulate. It really does start to pile on, and it's super unhealthy.
Yeah. It's almost like you have a hangover afterwards. Like
Yeah,
when you
absolutely.
work under pressure, or
Procrastination
you're
hangover. I
yeah,
like
when
that.
the
I
next
like that.
day it's somewhat similar to, when you're
It
in your early
is.
20s, you could probably go out for a night of drinking and recover from it easier than you can now. And it's like the same thing when you leave things to the last minute, you don't get enough sleep, you're not preparing, you
Yep.
have not practicing self-care. It takes longer and it's more stressful to recover from it. So yeah, that's but it is that fine line with the right type of pressure. And
Yep.
like you said, it switches depending on what's going on in your life and who knows what else.
Lots of things. I think there are lots of things that come into play there, but that's a tough one for a lot of us. Absolutely. One of the lies I used to tell myself all the time, because this when it comes to, sort of the whole time blindness, time management, and punctuality, kind of all where the intersection of all of those things are, that whole it will just take a second, right? This will just take a second. Let me just do this real quick, right? I used to really get myself in trouble with punctuality with that. I often, and I think other people use this term too, but call it one more thing itis, right? Let me just do this one more thing real quick, where it's really never as quick as I think it's going to be. And that's where we get ourselves into
Yeah.
trouble. A lot of us. Absolutely.
Yeah. I've usually always been on time. I'm not late. It might have made myself crazy getting there. But mine's more when it is more like deadlines, how long a project's going to take, or a paper
Gotcha.
or something. Oh yeah, I can get it done in an hour. And it's like, shoot, that takes like 3 days to do. Like it's just, and I don't even know for me whether it was a lie or I just never really processed that
Right.
it actually
Right.
takes a lot longer than it does. And sometimes it's the opposite with time, where we can be like, oh, it's going to take forever and it takes 5 minutes.
Yes.
So sometimes it's a lie or not a truth, and sometimes it's like we've never even figured out how long it actually takes.
And that's the thing, right? I always say that our perception of time is tied to how like interesting or stimulating the thing is.
Yeah.
And I think this is really true for me. And I know not all people with ADHD really have that time blindness to the degree that some of us do, definitely to the degree that I do. But if I am not looking forward to something, I'm going to put it that way. If it's something that I don't like, if it's something that feels big or nebulous or hard, and not hard, I never mean hard from a skills perspective or a knowledge perspective, but hard for me to get started on. If I'm not engaged, then I always think it's going to take much longer than it does. Or
Mhm.
I always remember it taking much longer than it did last time, or time seems to go much more slowly. If I'm interested, if I'm stimulated, if I'm having fun, if I'm engaged, if I'm, I'm really sort of in it or into it, then time goes really quickly. That's the stuff that I will underestimate. That's the stuff
Yes.
that where I'll get myself in trouble. My husband used to say when my kids were little, my husband, of course, if you've ever listened to me talk about, my husband is this like super organized, super structured engineer, right? And he's like, I always say he's like the least ADD guy on the planet. So when he says he's going to be home at 5, if he's not home by 4:45, like I'm literally starting to worry.
Mhm.
So he's got an amazing sense of time that I've never really quite like comprehended. So I would tell my kids, we're leaving in 15 minutes, okay, we're leaving in 10 minutes. And then it would be however long until
Yeah.
we actually left, like whether we were leaving the playground to come home or leaving to go somewhere. And my husband used to call them mommy minutes, right? And I found that my mommy minutes were as short or as long as I was interested in whatever was going on.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
if I was bored at the playground, 5 mommy minutes was super short. If I was engaged or talking to someone or, whatever, then my 5 mommy minutes could be 20. And he used to always say, our kids are never going to learn to
Mhm.
understand time
Yep.
because you use mommy minutes. And I'm like, well, that's all I've got. If I don't have a timer with me or a watch with me, but that's how a lot of us experience time.
Yes. Yes.
It can
Yeah.
get us in trouble.
Well, it's funny. I don't feel time. Like, if somebody to say, "What time do you think it is?" Like, I think I intuitively know what time it is on the clock, but I haven't felt that 20 minutes has gone by or it's been 3 hours. So it's time. Time. It's tough for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you good at guessing? Because we play that game, and that was one of the ways I helped my kids and myself get a little better at feeling time pass. I play the like, what time do I think it's going to be before I look at the clock? And I can be off by just a couple of minutes. I can be off by hours.
I surprisingly am usually really good that it's scaring me, but it's not because I felt how long time
Yeah.
has gone by. It's because I
You just have a good
intuitively
intuitive.
know what time it is on the clock, which doesn't connect to the rest of time. It's like it's I know what time it is, but I don't feel time.
You don't
So
feel it.
it's
Isn't that
yeah.
it amazes me because my husband will be within 5 minutes. I mean, we could be
Mhm.
hours since we've
Yeah.
seen a clock and he can still guess
Yeah.
within 5 minutes. I
Yeah.
can I can literally be off by hours.
Mhm.
I find it interesting. I always find these things interesting, but
Yeah.
I'm a little bit of a geek that way.
Yeah. Are
But
there
it
any
all
other lies or non-truths or whatever we want to call them that you think
oh gosh.
and
I
there's
hear
probably a bunch of them.
yeah, I hear so many that people talk
Yeah.
about. Let me see. Other people don't need, you fill in
Yes.
the blank.
Yes.
Planners,
Yeah.
lists,
Yes.
calendars. I mean, it's different for the person. Task management systems to write things down, to set reminders. I think a lot of us with ADHD think the rest of the world doesn't need these things. And I have
Yes.
some clients, especially when I used to work with younger people, that really resist using these things because they don't want to need them and they don't think the rest of the world needs them.
Yeah.
And
No,
that's a
the
lie.
rest of the world uses them, they just don't resist using them like we do.
And
Yeah.
they might not need to rely on them quite as much as we do.
Yes.
But that is one of the lies that we tell ourselves that can get ourselves into a lot
Mhm.
of trouble.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that's
And
the big one. I'll remember it. I don't need to write it down.
yep.
And yeah, I
Yep.
think it's especially the more crazy the world gets, the more things we get thrown at us. I think the more we realize it's really important to write things down.
Absolutely.
Like
And not just write them
yeah,
down in somewhere that's,
yes.
you're never going to find it again, right? You have to have a
Yes.
system, right?
Yes, yeah, yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, I'm like, yeah, I don't have a great system. I have a system that seems to be working for some things, but I could really improve my systems. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
where I'm pretty solid. I've got my other stuff, but in the
Yeah.
task management thing, my memory is not just bad. The thing I always sort of go back to is sometimes my memory like amazes even me,
Mm-hmm.
but more often than not, like it's just unreliable. Like
Yeah.
it's like literally minute to minute. I can remember something in great detail there's no real reason why I remember it
Yeah.
in such great detail. But then the next minute, I can't remember why I walked into the freaking room. And,
Gosh, yes.
so it's the, I always use the word wonky. I'm not sure if that resonates with anybody, but
Yeah.
it's the wonkiness, the unreliableness, if that's a word,
Yeah.
of my whole, memory, sense of time, all of those things that is what really reinforces my systems and my tools for me, because I know I need to
Yeah.
externalize those
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. Like I shouldn't have to
Absolutely.
ask myself every time I go onto Facebook, why did I go on Facebook? I knew it was for a business reason,
Right.
not to see what other people are fighting about or yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or why did I open the browser window? Right. I mean,
Yes,
I
yes.
came out in here for a reason. It's the same as,
Or why
like
did I go on
walking
my
into the
phone and
room.
why am I scrolling back to see which app I wanted to open? Yeah.
Right.
So
How
if
did I
I
end
had
up
it written
here?
down or had a system to
Mhm.
when I'm going to use my system that I have it written down on, it's
Right.
easier. Yeah. Yeah.
It's funny. We have this like little room in our basement that is like, we call it the pantry. We don't have like the kitchen pantry isn't much of a pantry. So this is where we store like the backup canned goods and non-perishable stuff, whatever. But all I have to do is walk down the steps and into that room. I can completely forgot what I came in there for. It's the
Yep.
same thing as with the internet or
Yep.
getting on your
Yeah.
social media, or the phone or whatever. I wouldn't dare go downstairs without something written on a sticky note telling me what I'm looking for in that room. Otherwise, I'm either going to come back with nothing or all kinds of things that I didn't need to bring back upstairs. Same thing with the internet, but we are, and so many other things, but we do tell ourselves like, we don't need to, we shouldn't need to.
Yeah.
When we really know ourselves, the truth
Yeah.
of the matter is,
Yep.
we sort of do, fool
We
me
have
once.
so many interesting things going on in our lives that take away our attention. So
Absolutely.
we
And in our
need,
brains.
yeah, it's helpful to have a system to ground us and bring us back down to the tasks that, we want to get done.
Absolutely. And now this is a bigger lie we tell ourselves. You brought up social media, and that sort of brings this one up for me. Like everyone else has their crap together. Everyone else has life all figured out. Everyone else has their stuff together. And when you look at things like social media, which I think right now it's even harder because so many of us are disconnected from the people that we normally surround ourselves with, who may like normalize some of the less perfectness. If that's a thing? I'm making up all kinds of words here today, but right now, a lot of us are connecting virtually. And, I always say nobody puts their double chin on Facebook, right? So
No.
the pictures you get, Tara, I'm sorry, Tara just totally cracked me up.
Sorry.
We do these calls on Zoom. And as soon as I said that, Tara lifted her chin.
I lifted my chin.
Right? Yes, that's how we do it, right? When we get a picture that's going to be social media worthy, we're going to pick the picture. We're also not going to post the easy mac we made our family for dinner tonight. People are only going to post the beautiful homemade meal they made to, that they're really proud of. People don't share, for the most part, on social media, like what's really going on below the surface. So all we see is this sort of like glossy exterior. We see like everything in 2 dimensions, and we make all of these assumptions about other people and how wonderful their lives are and how together they have things. And to compare yourself to that, of course we feel like failures. Of course we feel less than. So that's one of the big lies that we tell ourselves.
Yeah, and a lot of these
Everybody
people
else
who
has
take
stuff
their
figured out.
selfies, I was talking to someone recently, they're like, yeah, my selfie looks great. It takes me 80 tries until I find one that I really like. I'm like, so what you're seeing most likely is not real, even though social media is supposed to be real. Yeah.
And even that's even true of the people around you that you know, right? You
Yeah.
still don't know what's going on in their heads.
Yes.
You
No.
still don't know what goes on behind closed doors, even with people that you know well, right?
Mhm.
So trying to compare your real stuff, what you know about is what's going on inside you and in your world and in your mind and all of that, with what you see on the outside of everyone else is,
Yeah.
it's a
No,
recipe for
nobody has it
disaster.
all together. And it's the
Nobody
ones who
does.
appear that they're all together and their life's perfect who are the most messed up.
There you go. There you
Yeah.
go. I used to tell my son that it's the problems that you can't see as easily on the surface that are the hardest ones to deal with, right? And a lot
Yeah.
of people that show up as perfect or we perceive as perfect have just as many of those things going on in their lives as the rest of us do.
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely. That's an important thing to remember, right? We're all
Yeah.
human by definition. That means we're
Yeah.
all imperfect. And that sort of feeds into the other one, or it relates to the next one that I think a lot of us deal with, a lot of us with ADHD, especially if we don't have that network and we don't have that community, is I have to hide who I am, right? The wizard behind the curtain
Mhm.
is one of the things I
Yeah.
hear a lot about. People won't understand me, people will judge me, people will reject me. I can't let anybody see, how the sausage is made, so to speak, right? Or what's going on behind the curtain. And that is sad, right?
It is.
I think that's sad. But I also think we've all been there. And there are definitely people who get us more than others. That's the value of being in a community of people with ADHD who, are struggling with similar kinds of things. That's what you can find in the ADHD support talk community and other kinds of communities where there are people with ADHD who get your challenges and are, coming from a similar place. But it's, I think the wonderfulness, again, me sort of making up words, but the wonderfulness of who each of us is really is in those imperfections, right?
Definitely.
If
Yes.
if we were all sort of Stepford wives, for those of you who are too young to know what that means, sort of like the cardboard cutout glossy version of what we see, in celebrities. And if we were all really sort of like that, it would be very boring. It would be also very, um, what's the word? It would not be human.
No.
It would not be real.
Stepford
It would not be
wives type of,
sincere.
yeah.
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 Yeah. So find your peeps,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
and it can be challenging to be vulnerable enough and trust people enough to put yourself out there a little bit. But I think when you have ADHD, doing a little bit at a time, because sometimes we can go to the other extreme and we just tell everyone
Yes.
everything, and they're like, I said things to people, and they like just look at me like I don't even know what to say to that. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit at a time and building
Right.
trust with people. But yeah, it's great when people understand you and you connect with people that get you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really important thing to find anytime, but especially right now. So if you're
Yes.
someone who doesn't feel like you have, you know, I call, you know, I call it a tribe. You don't have that community. You don't have those people around you who really understand you and who you can be upfront and open with about the things that you struggle with. That's a really important thing to find. I think now, in the midst of a pandemic, more than ever, it's
Mhm.
always important.
Yes,
But,
yes.
you know, you're exactly right, Tara. I mean, I can't imagine there's anybody listening who hasn't shared something with someone that they thought would understand, to have them look at you like, you have three heads, or,
Yeah.
to get that whole sort of response that you get from people
Yeah.
when they don't understand why, like, being an adult is so hard for you, or,
Yes.
you know, just
Yeah.
showing up for your
Yeah.
with your for your
Yeah.
responsibilities is so hard sometimes. So it is so important.
But doing that little bit at a time and realize there
Yes.
are people out there and, being putting out yourself a little bit vulnerable, building that trust. But there are people out there, and it's great when you meet people that understand you and you can connect with, because it can get isolating out there. Or
Absolutely
in
it can.
here. Not about
Yeah.
we're not all out there right now.
Right. Sometimes in here, like, in your own
Yeah.
head is the most
Yeah.
isolating place of all, right?
Yes.
Even with all the voices that are constantly chattering in there, with the
Yes.
mental gerbils that are constantly running amok, it can
Yeah.
get awfully lonely in there. It's awfully
Yeah.
isolating if you're not trying to find your people. Absolutely. Anything you want to share with our listeners or any last thoughts?
I don't know. I just think just starting to like become aware of some of these things, and maybe people aren't relating to these lies, mistruths, or half truths, whatever you want to call them. But there's got to be something, and I think just becoming
Yeah,
aware that, oh, that's not working for me. That's okay. I get that. You can start first becoming aware, and then changing it to what works for you.
absolutely. All this stuff absolutely starts with self-awareness, right? If you don't realize that what you're telling yourself isn't part, if you don't realize that what you're telling yourself is part of the problem, then it's going to be really hard to address the problem. So sometimes paying attention to those little lies you're telling yourself, those little half-truths you're telling yourself, those little messages you're giving yourself that aren't serving you is the beginning of knowing how to shift them and change them and replace them with something that actually does serve you well. So
Yes.
I think it's a good conversation to have. Join us in the ADHD Support Talk Facebook community. If you have your own little lies you tell yourself that you'd like to share, it really is a supportive, uplifting community of people who get it and get your challenges. And I think it would be a great place to share any questions, any thoughts you have,
Yeah.
any insights on this or any other episode as well. I want to thank you for joining me again today, Tara. This is always fun. I always love having you on here,
Thank you. Yeah. And
or
if
having
you
each
want to,
other on here.
yeah. And if you want to learn more about me, you can go to taramcgillicuddy.com. I have lots of different events listed on my page.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for being here, Tara. Thank you all for listening. We'll catch you next time. Take care.